If you are a teacher, parent, administrator, student, and/or anyone who loves reconnecting children with nature, and you want to figure out how to cultivate learning gardens and nature-based curriculum, then this is the podcast, the Outdoor Classrooms podcast. My name is Victoria Hackett. I am the founder of Outdoor-Classrooms.com and the Secret Gardens Nature Classes. I love witnessing the magic that happens when children are playfully learning outdoors. Observing the return of wonder and curiosity when children are interacting with nature is pure magic. This is the podcast that is going to help you capture children's interest and give you not only inspiration, but some real life strategies that are going to help you figure out how to use the outdoor space, your outdoor space, as a teaching tool, so you can enlighten the playful learning experience for young children. Welcome to our Outdoor Classrooms community. Hey there, it's Victoria. We are going to dive into this episode in 1 second because it's so good. But before we do, I just want to ask you, did you know that I have an Outdoor Classrooms membership? Because it's the one thing that I am so excited about right now. It's called The Circle. This is a group of such amazing women and a few men, and I created it because it's what educators need. We need to surround ourselves with people who help us stay true to our identity as educators, who support the outdoor classroom movement, and who elevate our children's spirits, because we are the 5 people we spend the most time with. To solve our outdoor classrooms problems, we need to be with the people we can completely be ourselves with. Not only do we need to raise ourselves as educators, but we also don't need to be flawless parents and educators or take ourselves too seriously. That is the Circle membership. This is the space where you will feel so loved and so seen, if that is what you are looking for in your life and in your teaching practice. Just by being in this group, you will have the impression that you are developing into the educator and the person that you truly are. Every single week, there is something to tap into. Live Zoom sessions, sessions with me that are seasonal masterclasses, sessions with me that are Q&A and round tables. You are also going to have access to the Outdoor Classroom Tour and Talks from all over the world. We also have a book club in our community. Also, it's month to month, so you are going to want to check it out. So it's just a monthly commitment. I think you'll soon realize that this is something you've been looking for a long time. So if you want to check it out, go to www.outdoor-classrooms.com/circle-membership and you can join us. Truly, one of the most wonderful things about hosting the Outdoor Classrooms podcast are the incredible people that I get to meet and the educators that are doing amazing things across the world. I want to introduce Kath Murdoch. Her name is synonymous with inquiry learning, a field she has taught, researched, and written about throughout a career that spans 40 years. She's an experienced primary teacher, writer, university lecturer, and popular consultant. Kath has worked with teachers and students in schools throughout Australia, New Zealand, Asia, Africa, Canada, the United States, the UK, and Europe. She's the author of 17 books and numerous articles for teachers, including the best-selling The Power of Inquiry and Getting Personal with Inquiry Learning. Kath's work has influenced the ways in which educators around the world think about their role in cultivating curiosity, agency, and zest in their own and children's learning. Without further ado, Kath Murdoch. Hello, everybody. We have Kath Murdoch here. She is the author of many, many books, but specifically, I found her through the From Agency to Zest. Hello, Kath.
Hi.
Coming all the way from Australia. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Yeah.
Melbourne, Australia at the moment.
Oh, thank you so much for your time and your writings. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about how we are those folks who don't necessarily understand inquiry so much, and also ask you what inspired you to explore this concept.
One will I start with? I'll start with the second question before I get into it. But I have been researching, teaching, writing about using an inquiry-based approach pretty much my whole career. So I've been teaching for 40 years as of this year in various contexts. I think I was very fortunate as an undergraduate teacher to uh, be at the University of Melbourne in their teacher training course at the time with a group of incredibly inspiring uh, and brave lecturers that really introduced me to this way of working. And so I was steeped in the work of Jerome Bruner and Dewey and that whole mob right from the get-go. And although the way that I enacted inquiry in those early years of my teaching compared to now is vastly different, I consider it back then inquiry light rather than what I do now. But having said that, I think the seeds were planted really early in my career. I went into teaching thinking way back then that children needed to be engaged in meaningful explorations that made sense to them and that were hands-on and all those lovely things. So I wasn't one of those teachers that had an epiphany halfway through their career and suddenly moved away from worksheets and direct instruction. That obviously direct instruction's in my palette of practices, but from the get-go, it was very much about student-led practice. And I think also that, I think for all of us, a lot of our beliefs about teaching emerged too from our childhood and from the way we were parented, the experiences that we had and so on. But I do credit the people I was lucky enough to learn from in those very early days as a wide-eyed 20-year-old going into teaching, that really the foundation was right back then.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. So inspiring inquiry, understanding inquiry, we have this beautiful book, which you really put it to word.
Thank you.
Can you describe, you were just talking earlier about how this book came to be, and because I think it really speaks about what inquiry is. I think maybe some of our listeners kind of think, oh, inquiry. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
It's whenever people ask me to define inquiry, I feel a bit like I'm being asked to put an elephant into a matchbox because, and it's one of its problems really, is that it is difficult to define because inquiry is a stance first and foremost. And this is an idea that has been around for decades, but it's a way of being as a teacher. It's a stance or an approach that values curiosity, questioning, a way of seeing your role as a teacher to guide, coach, support, provoke, as well, of course, as explaining and modelling and demonstrating. But the emphasis is very much on teacher as guide and partner in the learning. So it's that stance, that way of being. We also use it as a noun. We say we are engaged in an inquiry. So another part of my work, as well as that pedagogical stance, is helping people design what we think of as journeys of inquiry, where we move through a process that takes us from the theories and ideas and questions that we might have at the shallow end to a much deeper understanding and hopefully application. So inquiry is also, it's a something that we could say is a unit of learning over time, and it's a stance. It's also a pedagogy. It's definitely something that I think of it as an art and a science. So there's a pedagogical toolkit that we build as educators that bring that inquiry stance to learning. So a lot of people associate inquiry with that's what you do when you do a unit of inquiry, or you do an inquiry. And yes, it is that, and it's more. To sound a little bit kind of hippie trippy, it's a way of being. I can't explain it more than that, but a way of being that very much values curiosity. And we hold the image of the child as the researcher, as the investigator, as someone that has the right to participate in decisions that are made about and for their learning.
So do you work with, as alongside of your writing about inquiry, do you work with schools and teachers, take them
Yep.
on this inquiry journey?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm a primary teacher at heart, and that's certainly early on in my career, that's what I was doing. And then I spent 10 years working at Melbourne University as an academic. And then for the last 20 years, I've been engaged as a consultant around the world. So I work with schools and some systems on developing that inquiry stance. A lot of work in international schools, a lot of work in the IB, the International Baccalaureate. So the PYP, the Primary Years Program, is one that is designed to support an inquiry-based approach. So I find myself around the world in a lot of those schools, but not exclusively in those schools. And then I have a number of partner schools here in Australia that I work with regularly. And I'm also really fortunate, I think, that the way the work has evolved has meant that I spend a great deal of time working with children. So I do a lot of, we call them learning labs, where just will observe the pedagogy, and we get to reflect and talk about what it means to bring this stance to our teaching.
Wow, that's beautiful. And so when you get, say, an educator that just doesn't have that innate inquiry-based teaching style, I guess, maybe, how do you transition or transform them into this inquiry? What's that journey like?
It's different for everybody. And, I'd be lying if I said that everybody is transformed. They're not always, there's obviously there are some people for whom their way of being as a person, or their hard wiring that they have around what it means to teach and what it means to be a teacher, really doesn't connect with this way of working, and that's fine. I mean, just as in the natural world, our natural world thrives on diversity, doesn't it? We need that biodiversity, and we need diversity in education too. We need, everybody has different strengths and ways of being. So I learned a long time ago not to keep pushing when I felt that I was that's not where my energy needed to be directed. Having said that, those people that might be tentative, uncertain, etc., at the beginning of the process, I think there are multiple keys to that evolution. The first thing that comes to mind is just dialogue, is collaborative dialogue. So this approach absolutely rests on the opportunity that leaders give educators to have time to talk things through and bring an inquiry stance to collaborative planning, to engage in dialogue. That's the first thing, through conversation. The second thing is definitely through seeing and hearing it in action, which is why I do a lot of work in the classroom. So sometimes that's when the light bulb goes on. And sometimes that's also people going, oh, actually I do this. I just didn't know that's what it was called. Or, oh, now that I understand why this feels right, I'm going to do it better. So I think by spending time working with children while others are watching and observing and being inquirers, the conversations we have out of that can be really transformative. And just time. The biggest shift in educators happens when they see in the engagement, the learning and the transformation in their children. And I really respect that I'm not going to change my ways if I don't see the value of it for children. But once we start seeing that's when we are prepared, because we all want the same thing. We all want children to learn and thrive and grow as a result of the work that we do.
That's right on. Yes, absolutely. So we have in this community a lot of nature-based educators that are working outside in outdoor classrooms. Can you tell us and share any insight that you have in terms of bringing in inquiry-based learning into their outdoor classrooms?
Well, I feel like I'm with my people here. The the very first book I published in 1989, I think, is a book called Integrating Inquiry. Sorry, what am I saying? Integrating naturally. So it was a play on words, so clever, which was about using nature as the context for back then a focus on integrating the curriculum. So it was a publication that looked at how you might use the context of a forest as a vehicle for connecting the curriculum, how you might use wetlands and so on. So that's really what
Ah,
was my first kind of published work, because it came from my passion and interest in the natural world as a context for learning. Again, what I just was lucky enough to have some really powerful mentors as a young teacher that championed that way of working, and was a active member of the Environmental Education Association of Australia and my home state Victoria throughout my teaching. So I have, a great passion for this. How do we use the outdoors as a basis or a context for inquiry? This may sound glib, but I will follow this up with more practical advice. But the first thing I want to say is you almost don't need to do much at all. All right. It's one of the practices that we have in our suite of inquiry practices is one simply called release. So we have release, we have notice, we have question, we have cultivate curiosity, we have keep it real. So we've got these 10 practices available to us. The release one is literally about releasing children. We often think of it in terms of intellectual release to children the opportunity to do more of the thinking, more of the time for themselves, rather than doing the thinking for them. In this case, I want to take it really literally. So I think when we release children into the wild, even if the wild is the schoolyard or the school garden or the local park, or if we're lucky enough to have more natural, less curated spaces around us, then the inquiry almost plans itself.
yeah.
And one of the strategies we talk about a lot is release in order to notice. So when we release children to explore, investigate, spend time, and then we adopt the position of researcher. So I'm observing and I'm noticing and I'm listening. That's when the seeds of inquiry are born. So, the number of times over these many years, for example, the discovery of a bird's nest has been the seed for a journey of inquiry that starts to look at bigger concepts
Yeah.
like structure and function, like the idea of habitat, like protection and so on. So I think the role of the outdoors in inquiry is, I think I say it in that little book that you mentioned earlier, is, I hear lots of teachers talking about, what can I do for a provocation for this unit? I need a provocation. And I think, just go outside. The provocation will take care of itself. It it's so true. You just spend any amount of time in a natural space, something will attract your curiosity.
Mm.
So I think part of this is just being aware and awake to those teachable moments that happen when
Yeah.
you are in the outdoors. And I'm not telling any of your listeners anything they don't know already, I'm sure.
But you're putting, you know what you're doing, and that's what I found so beautiful with your Agency to Zest book, is you're putting these concepts, which I sort of like, oh, it's just, open the door and the magic will happen.
Mm,
But I feel like you're putting the words to actually what is happening,
mm,
and therefore enabling all of us to describe it. And it's sort of like you said initially, you said that inquiry is very difficult to sort of describe. There's all these different components to it. It's sort of,
mm,
not
mm.
to woo woo, but I really feel like you have articulated the magic. You know,
It's to do that, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
part of the work that we have to do, particularly those of us that champion approaches that might seem outside the mainstream, we have to be able to articulate. We have to be able to say why we do what we do.
Mm.
And it's something I'm often talking to young teachers about is know your why. And when that parent asks you, how come my kid spent an hour playing outside today and not learning? We've got to be able to explain, here's where the learning is. We've got to be able to document it. We've got to be able to use that documentation to help people understand the learning that is there and also to help our children understand the learning that is there too. So putting words to it is important.
That's beautiful. So do you find that there's challenges, opportunities? We've talked a lot about that, but do you see any others that come up in terms of bringing inquiry, even indoors, outdoors, into educators and parents' lives, into children's lives?
Yeah. I don't know whether to respond to the opportunities or the challenges. There are plenty of both. I would say, I was thinking about this before I came on, going back to my roots in environmental education and the outdoor environment as a context for learning. And so in terms of opportunities, we know a lot, like I think of me as that wide-eyed 21-year-old teacher in 1984, and I think about what I understand now about learning and how deep learning works and what it means to flourish as a learner. And I think there's even more grist to the mill now about the importance of the outdoors as context. So if we think about, for example, we know that our children learn better when there's a sense of relevance, that this connects to my life in some way. This has meaning and relevance. And one of the practices we talk a lot about is keeping it real. You can't get more real than being in the outdoors. You're literally putting your hands on something and understanding it through that direct sensory engagement. So we know that that's great fuel for learning. We know a lot more now about curiosity, and we understand, I look at people like Dr. Susan Engel's work on curiosity and how if you learn something that you are curious about, you are going to learn it better. It's going to last longer. It's going to be deeper. So again, what better opportunity to activate curiosity than the outdoors? We know about the importance of taking risks, and there's all sorts of conversations at the moment about, you would be well across them, I'm sure, about the relationship between less outdoor time for children and the rise in anxiety, the hovering parent. I mean, I think the statistics on time that children have now where they are not in the presence of an adult is minuscule.
Yeah.
The rambling, the roaming. So all of that work around that's coming up about the importance of risk and just being able to figure stuff out for yourself. Again, watch children in a nature play environment and you see all of that happening. And the problem-based work that we know is so great for developing those dispositions and skills that we now champion. So I think the list is kind of endless. But when we talk about opportunity, and if we're trying to champion this work to those that might not understand it, if we can speak to the way learning in the context of the outdoors really goes with the grain of the brain and goes with what we understand now about powerful, deep learning, it speaks for itself. And I think that's really important. Of course, it aligns a lot with, and I know you've had people on your podcast talk about play. So there's a lot of alignment between the ways we need to talk and think and express and communicate the power of play and the power of being in the outdoors, let alone the most obvious reason to me of all, in that if we don't, we are producing a generation of children that are disconnected from their environment. And if they're disconnected from it, they're not going to do anything about looking after it.
And that's why I do what I do. Yes, I think that's
You bet.
You do. All
That's
of
where
them.
it comes from. Our mantra, back in the early 80s when I was working with the Environmental Education Association here, that beautiful mantra that still holds true for me, that learning needs to be about the environment.
Mm.
It needs to be in the environment, and it needs to be for the environment. And I think we add now the idea of with. So starting to really think more deep, that deep ecology notion of the right of the living world, not just the human worlds, but that equity and the right of the living world to
Yeah.
thrive. But that in, about, for, and with, for me, are the mantras that I still, decades later, are really helpful in the way we design for learning with kids.
Oh, I love how you articulate all of this. It's sort of, you hear it, but it's you really hit the nail on the head. It's beautiful. So with
Thank you.
your reflection and zest, the agency to zest, you ended with A and Z. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this book was written and
Oh,
where it
yeah.
came from? And so, and tell our readers, maybe not everybody knows it, but it's just describe it a little bit as well.
Um, this book was written, I've written a lot of books, but this one had a very different birth, and it was actually really delightful. It was almost written, I want to say by accident, but that's not quite right. After the COVID years of not being able to do my usual traveling for work, I finally got back on a plane. I can't even remember when this was now. It must have been late 2022, and did a month of working back around the world. And I just on Instagram, just on a whim, decided that each day I would find something in the world as I was traveling that spoke to me of inquiry. So that's right. I realized I was away for 26 days. It's like, oh, the alphabet has 26 letters. Oh, I'm going to do that. So it was all very just kind of cute. And I just put a photo up each day and a word and a little kind of reflection on the relationship between that word and inquiry. And then it got a bit of traction. And then a few people just said, oh, this would make a really good book. I went, okay. And I didn't do much with it at first. And then it just stayed with me. So I worked on it a lot more than just Instagram posts eventually.
Yeah.
And, and I'd been thinking for a while about trying to capture the essence of inquiry beyond the idea of, oh, there's a cycle of inquiry and there are stages that you go through and we do units of inquiry. While all of that is true, I wanted, I guess, to try to capture the bigger picture, some deeper concepts that resonated with people regardless of the year level they taught, regardless of their role, it was more about the spirit of it rather than the practical. Was the least practical book I've ever written.
My father, when growing up, used to make us write a word a day. We had to read
Oh,
hour,
really?
underline a word. We had to put it on an index card. So I don't know. There's just something about this book that really. So what I started doing for my morning practice was pick a word a day. So, and I love that you have additional words on the side here because I've gone through the alphabet once. Now I'm going through it again using your side words.
Oh, that's so nice that they're the words that I couldn't let go. I thought I can't put them in there. And I still, when I do workshops, we do a few things with the book at times at the moment, and people will come up with, like, I chose yield for why, and for me it was about yielding power. And oftentimes when people encounter that word now, they say, but no, it's like when you use inquiry, it's like a garden. It's like you yield the bounty. It's the crop. It's what you yield. And it's like, damn, why didn't I write that? So I'm getting all this lovely stuff back from people in terms of their interpretation of those concepts. And I particularly love that one because I think that when we do use an inquiry-based approach and when we are engaged in it in the outdoors, then we do yield, asking ourselves, what's the bounty that we come back, what are our arms laden with? And I hope that it is joy and a zest for learning and lots more questions, and kids no longer as fearful as they might have been to be outside. So it's a great question, I think, to bring to our thinking as educators is we often talk about the deficits, the things that are hard, what makes it difficult to do. But if we can also be asking, what's the yield? What's the bounty? What are we bringing back from that garden, metaphorically speaking and literally speaking, when we use this approach in the outdoors?
And it really gets people thinking, which is exactly what you're looking for. So well, obviously you do, but in terms of how you get there, but the impact of inquiry on curriculum design, and especially curriculum design outdoors.
Yes, of course.
It's all there.
But one of the features, I think, one of the features of this approach is that we, as educators that have a commitment to inquiry, we want to make sure that curriculum is something indeed that we design with and for our learners. So I am allergic to scripts. There are some that might argue that it makes life easier to be given, here's the unit, follow the bouncing ball, here's what you do week to week. That just takes all the joy out of it for me. It's just, no, thank you. The curriculum itself, so the written curriculum, whether it's whatever it might be, and here in Australia we have our Australian curriculum, we've got, I'm familiar with various curricula around the world, that provides us with quite often a really helpful kind of tool for consistency and so on. But that's enough. I've got that, and we always talk about get to know that curriculum really, really, really well so that it won't boss you around. So be as familiar with it as possible so that when, let's say, we have got that bird's nest moment or the hailstorm or I'm thinking about one of my favourite times of the year here in Australia is in October when there's the great Aussie bird count. So it's like a citizen science project that encourages everybody to document the birds in their backyards. And a lot of schools take that on and do a bird survey in their school grounds. It's a lot of fun, and but I want to be able to build an inquiry around that and be responsive to what's happening in the world. So when we talk about some inquiries are kind of, I always think of them as they bubble up. We weren't planning them, but they've bubbled up. And oftentimes they are ones that nature brings to you. And then there's other inquiries that are more projected inquiries where we might look ahead and see that this inquiry is going to happen at this time. But both of them still require us to plan and design in response to what we're noticing in the children's learning, with the whatever curriculum being back mapped to. So I need to know it well. So I think working in the outdoors in particular goes hand in hand with what we all know as emergent curriculum design. So it's not that we're not planning. It's not that we're not thinking ahead, but we have a big picture. We know what are the concepts, what are the understanding goals, what are the skills, and what are the dispositions that this context is helping these children develop. And if I've got that, I can let go a little bit and to uncover. But I do need that design frame first. When I was actually thinking before I came onto the podcast, I was thinking about my very early experiences with environmental education, and one of the most powerful for me was earth education. So it was the work of Steve Van Meter. I was lucky enough to do a workshop with Steve Van Meter here in Australia many, many, many years ago, and they talked about, way back then, they talked about concepts driving your thinking as an educator. So I was thinking, what were they again? I was just brainstorming them again this morning: energy, cycles, interconnectedness, change, diversity, adaptation. And, we talk about concept-based inquiry now as if it's this amazing new thing. There's nothing new about it. That people that worked primarily in the context of the outdoors and nature for decades have championed the idea that if we're concept-driven rather than content-driven, you need the content to get to the concepts, but the concepts should be what's driving our thinking as educators. So if I've got those concepts clear in my mind, adaptation, diversity, connection, energy, then in terms of curriculum design, when I'm outdoors, I can see how that little bird's nest or the children's sudden interest in bees or the fact that we're watching this chrysalis become a butterfly, how that links back to these big ideas, perhaps of cycles, connection, interconnectedness, interdependence, so on. So curriculum design for me is about knowing your concepts, being able to frame that inquiry and trusting that the context is there and our job is to make the connections to it, which goes right back to what I said before about dialogue. So this work is really enhanced if you can be part of a collaborative team to have conversations about how we're using this context to grow that deep understanding and what might we do next. And oftentimes in school situations, there might be somebody who comes in to do nature play or is the sustainability person or takes care of the school garden. And sometimes they're operating in isolation. They're not getting the opportunity for that collaboration. So any school that's doing this work, any outdoor educator that is listening, advocate for time design learning with others.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I get frustrated when schools think their teachers are not sort of nature-based or they can't open the door. They need to have someone else from the outside community to do that. And you describe it so well, that one person in isolation, and you lose that connection which you're talking about.
Yep. Almost that. Well, we really believe it's important for kids to be outdoors. That's great. So they do that for an hour on Tuesday afternoon. So that's good. That person takes care of that. I think we treat a lot of single subject or specialist teachers like that, where the benefit of it is actually what, particularly with this work, how can that lead the inquiry rather than being, they do that as a separate thing. That's when it's at its best. I'm thinking of a school that I work with here in Melbourne, in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, and really their sustainability work, sustainability is a core value of the school. So their grounds, the inquiries the children are engaged in, the way the children are actively contributing to the maintenance of the gardens, the recycling systems. It's part of the fabric of the school rather than this is a little separate piece. So I think that's another design thing, isn't it? How do we make this is who we are rather than this is just something we do once a week?
Yes. We speak in the same language. I love it.
Yeah, I know. And no doubt people listening are just nodding their heads going, yeah.
They're all nodding their heads.
We agree. What do they say? Preaching to the choir?
That's right. I want to touch upon the fact that you mentioned that you travel the world. And I'm curious if you see any global perspectives, that you notice any differences or similarities about inquiry in different parts of the world.
Well, I suppose I have a bit of a skewed interpretation of that. As I mentioned earlier, almost all of the work that I do around the world, except for maybe New Zealand, is in international schools. And there's a kind of, it's kind of a homogenous experience in a way. I mean, international schools by their nature are serving their clientele. Their kids are often from more, wealthy families, they're expat kids, or so it's a little bit of a bubble. The international community is a bit of a bubble. So on the one hand, I want to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
Where and with the International Baccalaureate and with the PYP, there's still enormous differences between those schools, but there is this underpinning philosophy that does really align with inquiry as a stance and with the idea of being an active contributing change maker in the world. And so I think, the kind of children that we're working with in those schools are going to be, that a lot of them are going to have those positions of power. And so in many ways, that's how I justify it. And then I make sure that all my work in Australia and New Zealand are more with my local schools. But I think one of the interesting things I notice from place to place is how, and again, this is nothing, not surprising, but the way place and environment, like literally the location of the school, how that influences the opportunities for and the valuing of outdoor learning. So I spent a week at the International School of Uganda this year, and even the way that the learning spaces are set up means the flow of indoor outdoor. There are just tables out. The kids were outside a lot. I mean, it was beautiful weather at that time of year, and the presence of nature. I was just constantly distracted by not knowing any of the bird calls that I was hearing, but they're just in it. So I think the ease of connection with nature in a environment like that, compared to say a high, I was in Japan last week, and the school that I was in was right in the midst of Tokyo. The environment around them, I mean, I don't think I heard a bird. And I think it was just because it was winter, or almost winter. So I think location, you have to work a lot harder, don't you, in an urban environment, to find that connection with the outdoors. I think it's a real challenge, and you become more and more. I think kids become more and more immune to and disconnected, and we've got to make more of an effort to get them on that bus. And which, their credit, these teachers in Japan had been doing with the children. But where can we take children to so that they have joyous, positive, connected experiences of being in the outdoors? Remembering that we have a generation of children that spend less time in the outdoors than ever before. Even more of a reason to make that a part of our curriculum design. But yeah, in answer to your question, I think by virtue of geography and location, the ease with which teachers would use and connect to the outdoors is highly influenced simply by where they are.
It's incredible. And it must be fascinating to see all these different places all over the world, children. I mean, all children are probably the same, but coming from different backgrounds. But to see the different spaces, I think really must be absolutely fascinating. And a reminder, too, that they are so different, that we really need to think about that piece.
Yeah.
Place-based.
We can say, we can bang on all we like about how important it is to get kids in the outdoor, blah, blah. But if you're in a little, in an urban, I'm thinking about a school in Vietnam, in Hanoi, and it's just like, we can't take these kids out here. That crossing the road is a nightmare. So there are really interesting challenges. And then it becomes more, I'm thinking of a little school here in Melbourne, in Footscray, which is, I'm quite inner city here. It's only about 15 minutes away from my house, and there is hardly a tree as far as the eye can see. But this school, there was a little empty block across the road from the school, and the principal a few years ago had the vision and the passion to sort of renature that block what the school had access to. And they did. And now they call it their farm. And they have a fire pit. They have vegetable garden. You couldn't get more urban than the location of this school. Honestly, it's just asphalt all around but they've got this beautiful little green space. And so it's about that. What green spaces can we create in our schools, and we can. And what material, what are we choosing? Are we putting down AstroTurf, or are we actually going to, if we're going to green the school, just have some part of the school that is natural, not artificial?
Yeah.
So we've seen, there are lots of examples like the school that I'm mentioning, even in the most urban of environments. But it is a challenge to do it well. And then when we do it, of course, we're benefiting the world, because we know that those little patches of green actually help with sustaining biodiversity. They're like these little islands for survival for non-human living things that use them.
Wow. I could talk to you all day. Go on and on.
I'm talking too much. You press my caution button.
What do you think is the future of inquiry-based learning? It's a big question to.
It is. Look, do you know what, Victoria? It is such an interesting time. I feel like there are, on the one hand, I want to say, wow, I've never had so many emails about working in schools. It's true. The interest is huge. On the other hand, there's, in Australia and in other parts of the world, there's a very strong conservative push at the moment. And I think it reflects at a more global level at this political conservatism. So we have in Australia at the moment, yet again, the kind of ridiculous false dichotomy, the war around direct instruction versus inquiry. And there's no versus at all, but inquiry is often mischievously positioned, sort of described as, it's just when you just say to kids, what do you want to learn about? Off you go. Just learn about it. Ridiculous. It's never been that. It's actually very scaffolded, etc. So I do what we have for the first time in my career. We have some systems here that are mandating highly didactic approaches to teaching. I've seen videos of best practice, and if people could see this, they'd see me doing air quotes, best practice of teachers standing at a board with a stick doing counting with little robotic children in rows. So I'm seeing that stuff happening in a really, a way I've not seen before. But juxtaposed against that is also this burgeoning interest in agency, curiosity, working in the outdoors, the right of the child to own their learning, and they seem to be sitting together. I don't want to buy into the idea of the fight between them. I don't think that's helpful, although that's often how it's positioned. I feel like it could go either way. And I feel what it needs champions. So I think the right of the child to be an active participant in their learning, and the role of the educator as coach, partner, supporter. I think we need to keep, those of us that really believe that to our core, need to keep advocating for that, because I think there is quite a strong and worrying surge of let's make teaching easy by giving you a script and by relegating children to really passive roles as learners. I think it is under threat, but I also think that simultaneously there's huge interest. So who knows?
We have a lot of meeting standards here. It's all about let's just meet the standards. And here's the script to meet the standards, and it just nightmare.
Yeah, and couple that with people with a growing kind of culture of boundaries between but that I'm hearing a lot of young teachers talking about, like, oh no, I need to protect my time and I'm not prepared to go above and beyond my however many hours of, so teaching as a job rather than a vocation. I think that also plays into it a little. So it's an interesting time, but I firmly believe that there's a huge number of people all over the world that are really committed to nurturing children's curiosity and agency. And I think that's going to go anywhere soon.
Yeah, I love what you also said about champions, that we need to raise champions, that just as you had champions in your life.
Absolutely.
As you were, so it's not a little, it is coming full circle.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the role, I think, when you're, at my stage in my career, that's the role of the elder.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, that's, I'm the big tree in the forest now, and with all my hollows and peeling bark and all of that. But we know, just like that big old tree serves a really important purpose in the forest, so do teachers with the wisdom of experience. Yeah. We have that role too. And I hope that that's what can help maintain we just need a wide lens on what it means to be a teacher and what the purpose of school is, which is a question we all need to keep asking.
You are amazing. I am so glad.
How are you?
Is there anything else that I may have missed that you'd like to share with our audience? And if not, where can we find you, your books, and all your beautiful body of work? And
I want to say to people, just keep, I want to say keep the faith. It's those of you that have been working in this field for a while, be that champion, be that voice at the table as people are planning, resist the scripts, and get your kids outdoors and let nature help drive your curriculum, because it makes it so much easier. And I mean, I'm on most of the social platforms. I am no longer on what was formerly known as Twitter, as a small act of protest. I'm not on that anymore, and I've got a love-hate relationship with social media, but I am there, and I've got a sporadic blog and an equally sporadic newsletter.
And I'll have all that
easy to connect
in the show notes as well.
Sure.
But you have really touched my thinking, and I very much appreciate your body of work.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, and also I was just delighted to flick through the other day so many of the podcasts, and there are people that you've had on that are people I admire greatly. So I would also say this is, a really lovely find for me, and something that I'll share with others, that you've got that resource available to the world. So thanks for the work you do too, Victoria.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kath.
Pleasure.